Why so many people have celiac disease nowadays? There are so many theories to explain this. However, the main theory is that the amount of gluten have increased exponentially in the flour. Native wheat has usually 3 to 4% gluten. However, nowadays we have varieties that can have 18% gluten, like for example the durum used to make pasta. Even whole wheat flour may have around 13% gluten. Bread flour have around 10-11% gluten. The only flour nowadays that is low in gluten is cake flour. Cake flour may have around 6% gluten. Many times this is the only flour that my patients tolerate. The question is, can we reduce the amount of gluten when we do a baking product? Or can we substitute the gluten with a different protein? First, we need to understand how we create gluten and what is the role of gluten. In wheat flour, you have two proteins, gliadin and glutenin. They mix and create gluten. And how they mix? They mix in the presence of water. So when you have flour and you add water and you start kneading the flour, you are creating gluten. So the longer you knead, the longer you work the dough, the more gluten you create. The more water you add, the more gluten you create. So if the goal is to reduce gluten, reduce the time of kneading and also reduce the amount of water. Also, we can use tenderizers. Tenderizers are any molecule or any ingredient that compete for water. Compete with gluten for water. For example, we can use sugar. Sugar holds the water and now the water is not available for gluten to develop. We can use salt, sodium, holds the water and now the water is not available for the gluten to develop. We can also use fat. For example, when I make a chiffon, I add oil. The oil is going to cover the glutenin and the gliadin and does not allow them to make the bones to create gluten. So we always said that fat is a tenderizer, in this case oil. However, none of these are healthy alternatives because we are using sugar, salt, or fat. So the question is, can we replace gluten with another protein? Yes. Remember that the main role of gluten is to create the structure of the product. So when we put it in the oven, the CO2 or the air or the steam expands, the product grows, but you don't want the product to collapse. And that is the role of gluten. Gluten is elastic, but resists the pressure. So the product grows without collapsing. So we can use other proteins to mimic this property. For example, I like to replace gluten with egg whites or with milk. Both of them have albumin. Albumin also expands and resists the pressure of the gases. So it sets the structure of your product without collapsing. So I can make, for example, a quinoa bread. Quinoa is high in protein. However, it's not elastic. So I'm going to mix the quinoa flour with egg whites. Now I can have a product with a bigger volume without any gluten. If I don't use the egg whites, I can make quinoa bread, but it's going to be a flat bread. So in conclusion, the main reason why so many people are allergic to gluten is the extremely high content of gluten of the flours that we use nowadays. Second point, we can decrease the amount of gluten available by using tenderizers like sugar, salt, or fat. Or we can replace the gluten with another protein, like for example egg whites or milk. If you want to pass a consultation with me, you can book it on my website, joelexebio.com. See you next week.